Our speaker is Jim Beerley. It's a great privilege for me to introduce Jim. I've known Jim for 40 years. He and I attended college together. I was his RA. And we were teammates together on the collegiate soccer team. And so I've known him and followed him through the years. God providentially has intersected our paths over the years, even sometimes through our children. Our theme this year was the idea of reforming missions, or the idea of the Reformation and things that change, how things change. And I thought of Jim as a speaker because he grew up on the mission field. He grew up, his parents are missionaries in Haiti. When he graduated from school, he went back to Haiti as a missionary. And then God took him from one bankrupt country to another. God moved he and his wife to Monte Carlo. You say bankrupt? They are just as spiritually bankrupt in Monte Carlo and Monaco as they are in Haiti. And Jim served there in the church, at an international church, for 17 years before coming back to assume the role of President Director for Cross World Canada. And so it's a great honor to have Jim come, who's one who's lived through generations of ministry, now sending people out to understand the change in missions. And so Jim is going to come and share with us. Thank you, Jim, for being here this week.
Good morning. Never tell a mission speaker take as much time as you want. Oh, okay. That's what I heard, but let's not quibble.
There is a rule that says any guest speaker has to preach longer than me.
Okay, they're already going to hate me after this anyway, so I do have my passport, so I'm out of here if you guys start throwing stuff. Few words. First of all, thank you. On behalf of John, can I speak for you? You guys are incredibly gracious hosts. And we really appreciate, and as I said in the first service, you should hear how your missionaries talk about you. They are so appreciative. This is a family. This is a mission family, as Glenn said. It's what you guys are doing out there, not just what they're doing. I do want to give a shout out to the tech crew back there. They hide behind those tinted windows. You may know, I was going to have them come out, but then they got to do stuff for me, so we'll just say thank you if you know who they are. I found out I'm actually related to the founding pastor of this church through his wife. Too long to do the whole rabbit trail down there, but one other thing, if you're visiting today, would you please give the church a second chance and come back next Sunday? I will not be here. So for Mission Sunday, Wayne, when he wrote to me, he said, could you preach on something that will offend as many people as possible? I said, perfect. I got just the thing, the call to missions. Woo! Now, bear with me. Don't leave early, okay? I'm always fascinated when I talk about the call to missions, the different responses that I get, the different responses people have. So I'm going to give you three options, and after each one, I'm going to ask for you to raise your hand if you self-identify with this. So here's the first one. Any takers? None? You're just too shy. Okay, one word for you guys, decaf. Okay, that's one word. Now, here's another option. No takers? Okay. So I think that regardless of which end of that spectrum you're on, all of us have a little bit of this. I really would love just to leave that up. Okay, well let's get to the question at hand. Is every Christian called to the mission field? Attention piège, where are my French-speaking friends, as my French teacher would say. Here's my answer. No, because it's for professionals like me, so the rest of you losers are off the hook. Let me close in prayer. No. How am I doing on the offending bit so far? But because no Christian, this is a proposition, no Christian is called to the mission field. Now, it's a bit semantical, but bear with me. So here, in the spirit of the Reformation, a thesis at 95 that Luther pounded on the door, thesis is a proposition for debate and discussion, and here's mine. The call to missions is not a call to missions, it's a call to God who is on mission, and there is a huge, huge difference. So, what does God on mission look like? Well, if you have your Bibles, turn to John 4. We're not going to read all the verses. It's the story of Jesus and the Samaritan woman at the well. Just to give you a little bit of a visual, they're in Jerusalem, Jesus and the disciples, they're going to Galilee. Now, normally, a good Jew would cross over the Jordan River, go up on the other side, and then step back into Galilee so they wouldn't have to put their literal foot in Samaria. But we find out in John 4 that Jesus said he's going to go up to Galilee. In verse 4, he says, now he had to go through Samaria. So in John chapter 1, verse 14, it says that Jesus was full of grace and truth. So as we look at Jesus on mission, we're going to try to find examples from this story what grace and truth look like missionally. So, verses 7 to 8, we see that grace takes the initiative. Jesus took the initiative to show grace. He starts a conversation when he didn't have to. He's thirsty. You ever been really, really thirsty? What's the only thing you can think about? Water, quenching your thirst. And the word weary is the word like weary from a beating, kind of like Michigan football team feels this today. Sorry, I'll get more to that later. So, is this the time when you want to start chatting with strangers? I've shared before. Sometimes I'll get on an airplane and I'm so tired, I just pray, Lord, please keep the seat next to me open. I just can't talk to another person. I'm exhausted. And yet Jesus knew that this woman was more thirsty than he was because she had an internal thirst. She was more weary than he was because in Matthew 11 he says, come to me, all you who are weary, beaten up by life, you're burdened down, and I will give you rest for your soul. Interestingly, in Monaco, people had a lot of money to go anywhere they wanted to for rest. But they couldn't get rest from their soul because wherever they go, they take themselves with them. So, yeah, it is a kind of a desperate spiritual poverty. As my one Canadian friend over there said, I have the hardest job in Monaco because I'm there to tell them about God and most of them think they are God. So Jesus says, look, I'm going to take the initiative. And to start that conversation, he had to overcome at least 4 prejudices. Racial, the Jews hated the Samaritans for 500 years at that time. Cultural, Sychar, that we saw up there, was called the City of Fools. That's what it was referred to. Socially, there was no public dialogue between men and women, Jews and Samaritans. And religiously, the Samaritan women were thought to be permanently unclean. And in this context, grace takes the initiative. Grace does not wait for people to stop being offensive. An example of this to help us understand would be Donald Trump asking Hillary Clinton for a drink, for a glass of water. Now, you laugh, right? Like, unthinkable. First of all, he wouldn't ask, and number 2, you don't know what she would put in the water. So, anyway, I digress. So, grace takes the initiative. Second point, Jesus creates a thirst for truth, pun intended. He introduces this in verse 10 by focusing on 2 things, the character of God and the resources of God. So he says, if you knew the gift, the word is literally free gift, it's only used in the Gospels in this place, and it's talking about unmerited favor, unmerited blessing or favor, and it's a word that stresses the benevolence of the giver, not the worthiness of the receiver. Do you think she would be interested in this? And then he talks about the resources. It's not just a little drop of water, it's living water, it's rushing water, it's continual, it's refreshing, it's pure, it's not stagnant. If you've ever been to the Canadian side of Niagara Falls, you can get within a hair's breadth of the edge of the falls. Just a wall about this high. and you can feel, first of all, the sound is amazing, and you can feel the power, and what amazes me is it never stops. And you look upstream and say, surely this thing's going to run out. That's the idea. Jesus is saying, look, God has an unlimited supply of water. And then he makes application to her truth in verses 16 to 18. And he says, go get your husband and come back. Now, why would he ask her here to go get her husband? I think it's because she said just before that, oh yeah, give me some of that water so I don't have to keep coming out here. This is the heat of the day. Most likely she was there because she was one of those women, as we'll find out soon. So nobody wanted to associate with her. Normally you would go out, as you do in Haiti, you get your water early in the morning before the sun hits, and then you don't have to go out. So she's out there alone. It wasn't geographically the closest well to Sychar. So she's saying, hey, this would be great, man. If I don't have to do this physical labor in the heat, could I have that? So he wants her to understand the depth of her despair, the depth of her need. So he says, go get your husband. And look at verse 17. I have no husband. It's the only time she refers to him without the word sir. Why? We're not going to go there, Jesus. Let's just move along. I have no husband. End of story. Let's move along. And Jesus says in verse 17, you are right when you say you have no husband. The fact is you've had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you've just said is quite true. Uh-oh. See, people don't like to confront their sin. We don't like to confront ours either, do we? The beautiful thing about Jesus is that we can confront our sin because he already knows, but there's forgiveness. In many religions, if you confront your sin, there's no forgiveness. You're going to pay for it. So it's just easier not to talk about it. And at that time, divorce was almost exclusively the prerogative of the man. So if you thought that this woman was really immoral, just kind of a really loose woman, can I ask you to please reconsider that? What has happened to her? 5 times she has been thrown aside as worthless chattel. I think the Pharisees, if she burned the toast, if she burned breakfast, you could divorce her. Some of them taught that. And now the guy she's living with doesn't even give her the honor of his name. You're not worthy of taking my name. You're just going to drag it through the mud, so I'll use you for my purposes, but just be glad I give you a roof over your head. Somebody said, I can't remember who it was, they said, look, be 10% nicer to everyone you meet, and you'll never go wrong. People are dealing with things in their lives that you have no idea about. You can't see it. They won't tell you about it. But if you are 10% nicer, you will never go wrong. That is good advice. You know the Me Too campaign that's going around Facebook? Any of you familiar with that? How depressing is that? You know how many of my friends have put Me Too? This is any woman who has been sexually harassed. I think that's basically what it is. Not even abused, but just harassed. Guys, come on. Well, she would have had Me Too in capital letters and neon signs. But sin doesn't repulse Jesus. I liked what Neil Cole said. He said, sin happens, and the mess of sin, the beauty of the mess of sin, it makes great fertilizer for the gospel. So, my point is, truth doesn't shout at darkness, it turns on the light. That's all we have to do. We're not protesting anything anymore. Oh, some things. But we are proclaiming Jesus. As we proclaim, then as the light comes, people can see whether they're in darkness. If I just tell you you're wrong, your religion is faulty, it's not going to get you anywhere, I've left you in no better position than you were before, unless I am proclaiming Christ. So just proclaim Christ. Want to get rid of darkness? Flip on a light. And thirdly, Jesus makes himself the ultimate issue. And if you notice the progression here, she starts off calling him a Jew, then she says you're a prophet, and then She says, I know that the Christ is coming, and when he comes, he will tell us all things. And he says, I who speak to you am he. So he has helped her move in her progression of understanding of him. Now, making Jesus the central issue is really hard for us. Maybe especially as missionaries or full-time ministers. But let me give you an example from my life. One of the few times I've gotten it right to help show you why it's so important. So in Monaco, this young lady named Michelle, mid-20s, she became a Christian. She started attending a Bible study that my wife was leading. Michelle was a model and a showgirl, a cabaret dancer. And during the Bible study, she said, please pray for me because I'm out of work. So they started praying. And she came a couple weeks later. She was all excited. She said, I got a job. They said, fantastic. What is it? She said, I'm going to be a model in a lingerie show. Now, John, you worked in Europe. Their level of modesty starts a little bit lower than probably Cincinnati. Déjà. So Mary came home and told me this and said, so what are you going to do? What are we going to do? And we thought long and hard and we said, let's pray. She's still coming to the study. We're still interacting with her. Let's just pray for God to lead her. A couple weeks later, she came to the Bible study. She said, well, I've quit my job. I said, why? So we were doing the walkthrough, the rehearsals, and I started thinking, I don't think the guys who are coming to this are looking at the lingerie. What? Who knew? We said, really? She said, yeah. So she goes back to her boss. She tells her she's quitting because she said, this show is really sleazy. And the boss agreed with her. It's unbelievable. She changed the show and she let Michelle wear things that she felt were modest enough for her to wear. That was in 96, I believe. Michelle then left Monaco not long after that. We never heard from her again. 2 years ago, I got an email, a message, and it said, hey, it's Michelle. I didn't even remember her. I asked Mary about it. She said, I was praying the other day and God said, find Jim and Mary. So I'm trying to find Jim and Mary. Where are you guys? Are you still in Monaco? Do you go back to the States? You in Haiti? Where are you? To make a long story short, Michelle is living in Oakville, which is right next to Mississauga, where we live. She was going to the same church that we had just started attending, the same one of the 3 services they have. But here's the cool thing, she's still walking with Jesus. See, if Pastor Jim had come and said, Michelle, good Christian girls don't do that. Oh, okay. What would happen when Pastor Jim was no longer in the picture? She would have done what she wanted. So, where's Pastor Jim? He's not telling me what's right and wrong. So she had learned to listen to the Spirit of God. Isn't that what we want? Isn't that what you want for yourself? So be careful that we don't jump on people and say, oh, you can't do that. You can. Just, as one guy said, may it be said of me that I led people to Jesus and left them there. Not that I walk away, I don't disciple them, but I keep bringing them back and say, well, you need to talk to Jesus first about that. And I can help you. So why should we model Jesus? Well, not long ago, the Barna Research Group did a survey on image evaluation. What did you think of these different people and the image that they project? There were 11 categories. Evangelicals was one. Do you know where we came in? 10th out of 11. And number 1 was the best image. Do you know who we beat? Prostitutes, who are probably asking for a recount now. Prostitutes? That's as good as we just a hair's breadth above prostitute. Why is it that Jesus was constantly surrounded by tax collectors and sinners, to the point that the religious leaders accused him about that? They made fun of him. Well, see, we need to be disciples of Jesus before we can be apostles of Jesus. And our definition of a disciple is someone who's learning to live and love like Jesus and helps others to do the same. So discipleship is not just making a squeaky clean me, being the best me I possibly can, but it's also helping others learn to live and love like Jesus. It's keeping it real, because as we disciple them, they're discipling us. And we're both learning to live and love like Jesus. And by the way, it's in the continual sense. It's not in the past sense. I haven't learned to live and love like Jesus. I am continuing to learn, because life is changing around me. So I need to adapt and learn from Jesus. So I want to give you 2 reasons why this is important. First, the field has thorns. The mission field that we talk about has thorns. I used to, on my grandfather's farm in Lancaster, he'd send me out to gather zucchini. Any of you ever harvest zucchini? Don't. They didn't tell me about zucchini, so I went out just in a little pair of shorts, and you got to reach down through these leaves and cut off the zucchini. What they didn't tell me was the leaves have these little razor-sharp edges. And I came back, and my legs and arms looked like I had been attacked. Well, the mission field has those little razors as you're trying to reach down. Maybe it's the weather. Maybe it's the culture, the things that have been shared this morning. And maybe it's the people. See, in these 2 verses, Jesus said, "My food is to do the will of him who sent me and finish his work. Do you not say," he's talking to the disciples, "4 months more and then the harvest? I tell you, open your eyes and look at the fields. They are ripe for harvest." Literally, lift up your eyes. They are white for harvest. Now, if they had literally lifted their eyes, what would they have seen? Well, it says earlier that the whole town was coming out to see Jesus. So this is what they would have seen, except multiplied by the whole town. Common costume is a white robe, white turban. Jesus, these are Samaritans. You don't understand. These are Democrats. These are Republicans. A little nervous laughter. Okay, we'll move on. Let me contextualize it for some of you. It reminded me of another white field. Yeah, now you hate me. Okay? Not Nittany Lions, Lord. You don't love them. They're thorny. They're the enemy. So that's the first one. The field has thorns. Secondly, the harvest is not ours. In Matthew 9, Jesus says, look, the harvest is plentiful, the workers are few. Now, what would we say in North America? What would be our verse 38? À l'attaque! Let's go, boys! Come on! Get together, get in the bus, get on the airplane, we're moving. Jesus says, pray. Doesn't that seem like a waste of time? He says, pray the Lord of the harvest to what? Send out laborers into his harvest. And I never thought about that before until just recently. That word hit me. Because I remember working with a couple in Monaco, newly married, and they kept dealing with the same issues. And finally one day I said, let me just ask you a question. How committed are you to the lordship of Jesus Christ in your life? And the wife said, 25%. And she was the older Christian of the two. No wonder. Would God want to send somebody out into the field with 25%? Or to help you maybe feel what that feels like, how many of you have children? Okay, remember either now or before when they were young, you forgot what sleep was? You hadn't had a night's sleep in 20 years, it felt like. And I come, being the magnanimous person I am, and I say, listen, I want to babysit for you guys, free of charge, man. You just have a night out. And you say, you were such a blessing. I say, I know. So you get ready. I'm coming over at 8 o'clock. Well, it's America, so it's 6 o'clock. And then you guys go out and have fun together, just talk, baby talk. And so you get dressed up. I show up, and as you're leaving the door, you say, by the way, Jim, how committed are you to the well-being of our children? And I say, well, 25%. I can't give you more than that because there may be a game on, or I may want to text my kids or my wife. Would you walk out the door? Now, I don't want to name names. I met with a couple this week, and I'm pretty sure they're here, actually. I'm pretty sure that would have been good enough. Anything in double digits, 10 or greater, I'm good. You know you would too. I wasn't always in double digits with my kids, so. But that's the analogy. You know, you'd be a little nerve-wracking. You'd still go because, you've been there. But it'd be a little nervous. So just as we wouldn't trust our kids with somebody who's that blasé about their well-being, God doesn't want to trust his children, his harvest, to people who are 25% committed. He only sends those he can trust, and he only trusts those who love him above all else. When Jesus was restoring Peter to ministry in John 21, what did he ask him? One question 3 times. Do you love me? Not do you love them. Do you love me? Okay, then go feed my sheep. Do you love me? Okay, now you can be useful. Do you love me? That's the most important question we have to answer. Do we love him above ministry? Because there'll be plenty of reasons to walk away unless we are there for Jesus. So who does God trust enough to send? Quickly, I would say those who are blessed. Those he calls blessed, you would suppose that's pretty good indication that he trusts these guys, right? Well, who are the blessed? Look familiar? You heard this before? Poor in spirit, those who mourn, the meek, hunger and thirst after true righteousness. All of those have to do with our attitude towards God. It's me and God. I'm not mourning my sin to you. I'm mourning over my sin to God. I'm not broken over that with you. I don't hunger and thirst for your righteousness. I hunger and thirst for him. Well, how do I know if I'm all these things? He said, glad you asked. How do you know that you are poor in spirit? You're merciful. The mercy we have received from God, we will extend to others. How do you know that you mourn? Because you're pure in heart. You've been renewed, and so your heart is fresh, and you are able to minister to people out of that. You are a peacemaker because you're not demanding your own way. And you will be persecuted, by the way. If you want to know what mission agencies are looking for, they're looking for servant, or at least me. I'll talk about me. I can't talk about others. We're looking for people who have a servant's heart and people who know how to suffer well. Those are 2 starting points, because those will both be tested. So the first 4 are the call to God. The second 4 are the examples of that. As God sends us out, he sends us out with those attitudes. And by the way, that's a continual circle. As a missionary kid, as a missionary, now a home site executive, I still have to make sure that I'm doing those first 4. Because I'm always interacting with people, and I don't want to do it out of my own flesh. So I want to just take a brief minute, and this is where it could be semantics, but I think there's a big difference. Called versus sent. I think I would like to say that we need to think more of sent instead of called, and it's a bit semantics. Called in the Bible is used primarily of salvation and sanctification, Acts 13 notwithstanding. And sent is dealt with, it usually refers to being service or involved in service and witness. And I think I put some verses up there. Mark 3, called them to be with him that he might send them out. As the Father has sent me, I am sending you. And because they carry a very different feel. Called puts the onus on us, doesn't it? If you call me, I get to see your number and maybe your name. And no offense, I may decide to take it later. I can just say, oh, not now. I heard a song that reminds me of this. I started to sing it in the first service. I won't abuse you by doing it. Now, maybe you'll recognize it. Hello from the other side. I must have called 1,000 times, but when I call, you never seem to be home. Any of you recognize that? Okay, those are the pagans. When you got to deal with those. That's an Adele song. I sometimes picture Jesus say, "Hello, hey." So if we talk about, I'm not called. Really? Is your phone on silent? Airplane mode? Better check it. But if we talk about sent, that puts me under Jesus' authority. If I say to you, if I have an authoritative relationship over you, and I say, "Hey, go," you do it. You all have bosses. They tell you to do something, you do it. Why? Because they are sending you to do it. Doesn't matter how you feel. It just matters that they have the authority to ask you to do it, and so you're required to do it. So when we talk about reforming missions, can I just say that it must start with reforming Christians into the image of Christ. How do we get conformed to the image of Christ? We spend time with Him. We go to Him that He might send us out. Why is this important? Well, before I get to that, let me give you some next steps. Just a suggestion. What can you do now? Because it's one thing to share information with you, or share truth, but the real question is, what are you going to do with it? So may I suggest you pick one of these. What's the most important question to answer, conversation to have, opportunity to consider, decision to make, or action to take this week? Talk to your pastoral staff. Talk to your elders, your small group leaders. Talk to your friends, your family, your spouse. And just say, listen, and I'm convinced that if you are quiet before God, He will tell you which one of these to start with. Because who's more interested in reaching the world for Jesus? Jesus or me? Jesus or you? That's not a trick question. It's Jesus. And here's the 4 words I want to leave you with. Good news cannot wait. You know what the gospel means? Good news. If somebody has a terminal illness, it's not good news that there's a cure if you don't get it to them in time. And people are dying spiritually and physically all around us. It's not good news if we just keep it to the side and share it after they're gone. The gospel cannot wait. Good news cannot wait. So would you please take time to draw close to Jesus? Be discipled. Ask somebody, if you haven't been discipled, ask somebody to disciple you, an older Christian. Pray the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers. And as prayer, I view as aligning my will with God's. And as I align it, I also say, don't just send them. Here am I, Lord, send them. But say, God, what part do you want me to play in all of this? And I said to somebody between services, I think the reason this church is so exciting to be around is because missions isn't something you've outsourced. Missions is something that you are doing here in your Jerusalem and in your Judea and in your Samaria and to the ends of the earth. Let's pray.